So you might be wondering, the Post-Qualitative Research Collective, if you're not a member of that, what is that? So we started 2 years ago. It's a 3-year project funded by the National Research Foundation of South Africa. And the whole idea of it is it's a network of people interested in post-qualitative research all over the world, and through this network share experiences, learn from each other, and also try to build something more. So we do regularly events. We've got research groups, and a lot of our communication goes through WhatsApp. We've got a website that George is going to share with you in a minute. So George is our new research assistant, and we're absolutely delighted to have her. And there has been a bit of a kind of lull, kind of quiet period, because it takes a while when someone, we had Anneke Schlabbert as our research assistant, and then there was a bit of a lull, and now we've got George, who is really just communicating a lot and helping us develop further the website that we set up, and also with the book series. And the whole idea of it is that we develop over the 3 years a online course on post-qualitative research. And the idea of the collective is that we support each other in supervision, in doing research post-qualitatively, and more. So what I'm just going to finish with is just to also thank very much Viv, who is the co-investigator of this research project, and also Roseanne Reynolds, that you can see, who is the co-PI, and really also shadowing me what it means to run a project like that at a university in South Africa. And yeah, so we are the kind of research team. And we would like to invite you also to come to our kind of annual big event. And that's going to be the last one. And that is going to be run next year in January on the 14th of May in Portsmouth. It's attached, but also independent of the European conference on on qualitative inquiry or inquiry. And it's hybrid, and it's from 8 till 8. This is British time, and also taking account of people that come in later from like the States, and it will be, some of it will be repetition, but a lot of it is really about what has happened and what is still to happen, but also looking forward to maybe some ground writing, how we can pursue this very important project after next year, at the end of next year, and also very much working on this kind of course elements, very practical, very experimental, that we're going to and try out next year. So this, I don't want to take up more of this, of the time of the panel. I'm very excited about the topic, and also how it builds on what Mirka organized in Arizona in May, I think it was, which was also about ethics and justice. And absolutely delighted to see Astrid again as well, and others here in the room. So I'll hand back over to you, Viv. Have I forgotten anything?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
Thank
so
you
yeah,
very
the registration for especially if you actually want to be where we are, we're going to be in a very cool place in Portsmouth, where you want to come, maybe join us, you're very welcome. But all that will be on the website, in the poster, a link for how to register. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how it's going to work for the rest of the session. So people know, because of the poster you've looked at, that the session is on responsibility and justice. and we have our three panelists. And what we've decided, well, first of all, we wanted to make it as close to responsibility, enacting responsibility and justice as possible. So we had a discussion amongst the panelists, and we came to the conclusion after various scenarios that each panelist would have 10 minutes just to say something initially. Each panelist has also given 2 papers, which we've in the group have been studying. So we started 3 weeks ago, and we first looked at Astrid's papers, and then we looked at Asilia's, and then Lesley. So we decided to go in that order. So I'm going to call on Astrid first and just say a little bit about Astrid. She's a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter in the Department of Sociology, Philosophy, and Anthropology. And she works at the intersections of feminist science studies, human-animal studies, new materialisms, and post-humanist theories. Her work explores questions of responsibility, care, and agency in scientific knowledge production, new ontologies, the relationship between anthropocentrism and conceptions of time, and questions of environmental justice, all of which were evident in the readings you gave us. Astrid has been particularly interested in scientific research on marine microbes. Under the heading of Caring with Haunted Microbes, she develops new theoretical approaches in science studies, combining agential realism and biodeconstruction. Working with artists and marine scientists, she also seeks to develop new approaches to and methodologies in cross-disciplinary based on the notion of diffraction. So it's a wonderful little blurb on you, and I'm looking forward to you talking now. Do you need to share your screen, Astrid, or are you just going to talk off the cuff? We can't hear you. Well, I can't hear you. Maybe others can. We can't hear you. You muted.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It didn't work with the headphone. So I hope that, I have a bit of a background noise here. There's construction in front of my building. I hope it all goes okay. But thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm grateful that you have engaged, if you have engaged with the papers that I distributed. So what I'm trying to do, I didn't prepare PowerPoint slides. Just as a way of an introduction, I thought I'd say a little bit about the relationship between responsibility and responsibility, as I've trying to work it out mainly in the paper on the fish killer, on Pfisteria piscicida, that some of you have read. So to begin at the beginning, so I'm in science and technology studies. So I'm interested in how scientists, in particular marine microbiologists, get to know their objects of studies. Now, with the help of Karen Barat's agential realism, I have asked how experiments in science or in microbiology can be both objective and responsible. And I'm interested in that question of objectivity and responsibility because I also have been trained as a scientist. And like Bharat, I've been trained as a physicist. One of the many reasons that I could name to leave physics at some point was that there was no space for responsibility. So space or time to ask questions during the science, in the practice of science. What is our responsibility? So ordinary notions of objectivity that confuse way too often objectivity with neutrality preclude responsibility, or if not preclude, delegate it to an issue that becomes relevant after the facts are established. But this is usually too late. So I have been concerned with responsibility in the practice of science rather than afterwards. So that is needs to be pronounced. And Karen-Barad's ident realism enabled such an account of responsibility. So they not only enable the simultaneous existence of objectivity and responsibility in science, but ident realism suggests that accountability, and which is not exactly the same thing, and objectivity co-implicate each other. So crucial for, so this is a bit of revision for, I believe most of you are very familiar with Karen-Barad's account of ident realism. Crucial in Barad's account of ident realism, so that co-implicates objectivity and responsibility, is that the referent of the experiment is not an object or a thing, but what they call a phenomenon. So I have the technical definition here of a phenomenon. It is an ontological inseparability of identally interacting components. So that's a mouthful for people who heard that for the first time. But what this really means, a phenomenon is an inseparability of interacting components, means that there are no subject and objects pre-existing the experimenting, pre-existing the relating. What is an agency of observation and what is an object of studies is not, is inseparable before the experimentation begins. So responsibility becomes necessary for the separation of objects and subjects or agencies of observations and objects. So this amounts to what Donna Haraway called beings don't pre-exist their relatings. So ident realism is a relational ontology, or assumes a relational ontology. So for Barad, then, responsibility is a matter of accounting for these interacting components that make up a phenomenon. So responsible and objects experiment and resolve this inherent indeterminacy. So in an essay on the fish-killing microbe, Pfisteria piscicida, I have been trying to expand on Barad's account of responsibility and relating it to responsibility, so the ability to respond, or as I call it, the enabling of responsiveness. And maybe we want to talk a little bit about the difference between enabling of responsiveness in specific relationships and the ability to respond. So in doing so, I have been following Jacques Derrida, who has linked the notion of responsibility to the ability to respond, responsibility. In an essay that was titled, or is titled, Say the Animal Responded, and I think that is originated in the 1980s sometime. So here Derrida claims that the distinction between humanity and animality hinges on the ability to respond. Respond must distinguish from an automatic reaction. So a reaction is kind of the, animals would not be able to respond. Animals would only be able to react, is what Derrida tells us. All the philosophers in the history of philosophy have been assuming that animals merely react, they cannot respond. So response then requires something that apparently or allegedly only humans are capable of. It needs historicity and it needs memory. So response in a way is something unlike a reaction that remains in the present moment. Response is something that is creative, innovative, and forward-looking, it's future-oriented. Response has a different temporality associated with than reaction. So, of course, Derrida is trying to undo that distinction, but rather than claiming that animals are also capable of a response, he asked us whether we know what a response is, and is it really so clear? Is a distinction really so clear? And are humans actually able of a response? If animals aren't able of a response, do we know what the difference between a response and a reaction really is? So in my account of responsibility, has then become a question of time. So borrowing from Derrida, the association of response with specific kind of temporality. So developing responsibility in scientific experimentation with the help of this mysterious marine microbe that has been accused of massively killing fish, which I've not called mysterious microbe, but phantomatic microbe. So I've called their ontology phantomatic. I'm not sure anymore why I hesitated calling it hauntology rather than phantomatic ontology, but both are trying to do justice to the fact that they can't be captured at any moment in time. They can't be captured in any presence because they are changing who they are under different environmental conditions. So in that essay on the fish killing microbe, so I try to expand on Barrett's notion on responsibility that hinges on this fundamental indeterminacy or this fundamental inseparability of subject and objects, which Barrett derives from Niels Bohr's account of quantum mechanics. So the scientific descriptions of this, how this microbe transforms under specific environmental conditions, the descriptions of this life cycle of the microbe suggest not one, but two entangled indeterminacies, and one spatial and one temporal. And because these are two entangled indeterminacies, these can't be resolved anymore. There is no way of accounting for all the experimental conditions so that this entanglement can come to its resolution. So that complicates the story here of the objective referent of the experiments. So I'm claiming that the phenomenon to be accounted for couldn't be accounted for without extension through time. And that extension was only possible when, in addition to all these other components that make up the phenomenon, matters of concern or matters of care, to use Maria Puig de la Bellacasa's term, become part of the objective referent. So accountability is not possible anymore. Responsibility is not possible anymore when caring in this case is about the environmental condition that enable this fish killing microbe to continue to kill the fish. Now the construction keeps going. I hope you don't hear it as loudly as I do. So because of this, because the transformation of this organism as such, that the history of how they have been acting in the past matters to how they are acting in the present, it has not been possible to determine it in any specific present. And the determination of what this organism is and how it acts is only possible if people, or at least what I was claiming, is that people care about to find out about the environmental conditions that enable the so-called fish killer. So in the essay, I juxtaposed two kinds of experiments, one in which the scientists are trying to solve a murder mystery, I've been calling it, in which the microbes, the murderer, is in possession of a toxic gene that would be the murder weapon. But in spite of the fact that it's very difficult to prove an absence, I have been claiming it's kind of futile to hunt for something that is a property of an organism that does not exist in any particular present. So that changes what it is under specific environmental conditions. So so neither the microbe nor the condition under which it becomes a fish killer, under which it becomes toxic, could be determined independently from each other. And because the microbe's behavior and the transformation depend on its history. So the microbe only is what it is. The microbe only exists as what and how it inherits from what it has been before. So that is in order to, now I'm feeling connection. So in order to show that responsibility required here an ongoing and continuous enabling of responsiveness in order to basically enable these critters to continue to see to be killing fish. That had to be an ongoing enabling of specific conditions that in careful experiments had to be tinkered with to see it continue to be killing fish. So it is an existence that I would not now call hauntological, because there is no beginning, there is an absence of origin of the killing of fish. So the responsiveness had to be continuous. I think that's what I wanted to say. I hope that was understandable. So many of you may have heard it before or similar things before, but so yeah, I hope it made a point about responsibility and the connection to responsibility in this particular case. Okay, thank you.
You're muted, Viv.
Yeah, thanks so much, Astrid. It was very clear to me. I'm hoping it was clear to others, but they're going to have the opportunity to ask questions. I'm just going to allow the speakers each to speak first, and then we'll take questions afterwards. And the panelists must also feel free to ask each other questions, as we spoke about before, because I think you've engaged with each other's work. So I'm going to be calling on Asilia Franklin-Phipps next. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Studies at SUNY New Paltz. She completed her PhD in 2018 at the University of Oregon in critical sociocultural studies in education. And she draws on a capacious range of disciplinary practices, including philosophy of education, Black studies, Black feminism, and affect theories. Asilia's work explores race education, visual and popular culture, and pedagogy. And it's appeared in various journals: Cultural Studies, Critical Methodologies, the Journal of Curriculum Theorizing, Girlhood Studies, Qualitative Studies in Education, and Educational Philosophy and Theory. So welcome, Asilia, and I'm you now to speak about responsibility and justice.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to the other panelists for your papers. I found them very exciting and interesting and challenging even. So I am in a very different direction. So I hope you will be okay with that. So I don't know if I think a lot about responsibility explicitly. And so I was kind of challenged to think about what I would want to say briefly about it. I teach art teachers, future art teachers, and I teach, actually I teach a lot of different kinds of teachers. I don't really think of myself as a teacher educator because I'm in ed studies. And so I don't teach methods. I don't teach toward any certification. So I have a lot of freedom to really ask questions with students about culture, about norms, about what counts as teaching, what counts as learning, what counts as knowledge. And I am sort of like a voice, people in my department included, in a broader context that is not engaged in any of those questions, right? That has sort of like broadly accepted the most dominant ideas about teaching and learning that are quite disciplinary, punitive, about domination and disciplining and management. That's sort of a lot of the tendencies in a lot of the conversations. So I'm very interested in that. I'm interested in how we are reproducing a lot of these very same systems, even within the conversation about inclusion and diversity and social justice. And so when I think about responsibility, I think about postures and orientations that are resistant to those things, even as there's not recognition or reward for resistance to those things, right? And actually there might be increasingly punishment for the person resisting that. So just really quickly, last week, we read an article by my colleague, Albert Stabler. I think he's at Illinois State. And the article is called Press Charges. And it's about a Facebook group of art teachers. An original poster posted about a student hitting them. They broke up a fight. They said the student squared up, quote, and punched him or them. I don't know the original poster. They didn't really say anything else. And so the article is about the responses to that and the ways that art teachers were telling the original poster to press charges, right? And sort of like that was what a good teacher would do, is to escalate the punishment because the 16-year-old hit the original poster. And so I was really thinking about with students, like what this means and how this reflects a particular understanding of adolescence that is quite raced, classed, and gendered, and a particular understanding of what the role of a teacher is, right? And how it, again, reflects those same tendencies around domination, control, violence, frankly. And so that's what I'm really kind of thinking about of late and how that relates to pedagogy and curriculum. So I hope you'll have questions about this. So I am both interested in supporting students in developing their ideas about these things, but also modeling a very different way of teaching and learning in a space that really does not recognize very many other ways. And so I have a note to myself, which maybe you'll, about some of these things, about responsibility, but the implications on things like care and knowledge, togetherness, pedagogy. And so this is a note to myself because it's just a note to myself about kind of the responsibility of teaching college students and teaching future teachers. And one of the things that how much time do I have? I'm gonna go really fast. So one of the things I note to myself.
You've got 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. To account for the context, the shifting context, and I'm using context in a pretty particular way. And some of these things include, what are the conditions of arrival? we often talk about students as though they have the same conditions of arrival. And so really thinking about how we all got to the space together. And that includes material positioning, and resistance and refusal and reproduction of those positionings, and the implications on power and agency and the fluidity of those things, right? How those things are moving across us. And then the other thing, note to myself, is always to try to be very spatially aware. And that means attending to the space between knowing and doing, right? The space between my commitments for justice and those different things and my actions, right? The distance between those things. The space between my politics and the ways I've been socialized around those same sort of tendencies of domination and disciplining and surveillance. And like trying to learn in that space, right? Like learn what I can do and how I can sort of move around there. And then the other one is to really understand and engage my own limits, right? And this is what I hope my students do when they become teachers. And the limits of what I can know, right? And the limits of my ability to see and observe, and how that is also often projection, and rooted in the ways I've been socialized to see. I mean, if you read my article about police brutality, kind of I was engaging some of that, right? That we're not seeing things in the same way. And what are the implications of those different ways of seeing? Like seeing is not neutral. And then really trying to follow those texts, people, students, ideas that are less limited than I am, right, in different areas. And then the last one is I really hope to be very movable and not resist change and try to shift and move with the change. In this one, I'm really thinking about how different students have experienced college post-pandemic, right? And I see so many of my colleagues trying to go back to what was before, and doing a lot of damage and harm with that resistance to change. And so really thinking about what does it mean to account for change and move with it, right? And reorient myself in relation to that change. So, I mean, I think that those are some of the things that come across. My work is quite diverse, I would say. I really like to write a lot about culture and think about what are the implications of culture and politics on teaching and learning. And I think I'm always in trying to respond to what I find here, very impoverished discourse about what should happen in schools, and how, and sort of like engage the potential that I still see in these institutions, despite all of the deep critiques there are about them. So I will stop there. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Asilia. Can you hear me? Am I not on mute? Yeah, okay. You had a couple of minutes to spare, so thanks for that. We're going on to Lesley Grange now. Lesley is a distinguished professor in the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University, which is also in Cape Town, South Africa. And Lesley has published a huge amount of articles and chapters and books. And his current research interests include sustainability education, education in a post-human world, history of school biology in South Africa, the relationship between science and indigenous knowledge, which you would have seen if you had have read some of the papers that Lesley gave us, Ubuntu as ecosophy, and its implications for education, which was also in the paper, curriculum change in South Africa with reference to life sciences, geography, and environmental education, decolonizing the university curriculum, and also research methodology. So welcome, Lesley, and let's hear what you have to say for your 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks very much, Viv, and it's wonderful to be here and to interact with the panelists and with everyone else that is in attendance. So, yeah, and apologies for the fact that I haven't been able to interact with you for the duration of the project, but my workload has just prevented me from doing so. So I'm happy to share these few moments with you. So just a few things. I'm not sure whether I would like to sacrifice social justice on the altar of a broader ecological justice. I'm not sure whether I want to do that. So how do I think about what it is I try to do in my work? So I observe, I think, things that are happening in the world, like all of us do. And then I try to think with ideas that is talking to those, the condition that we find ourselves in. So we all know that many have spoken about the particular condition as a post-human condition. That is, Bradotti has said that is a convergence between both post-humanism and post-anthropocentrism. So, and then what in my work as somebody who works in education, I think that as we're trying to work out academic theories, and I accept the fact that that when we do that, it's more theorizing, that becomes a process of experimentation. Then in the kind of work I do to say how do I bring that into conversation with the areas in which I work in, such as research methodology and curriculum, and then look at ways in which we might want to rethink and reimagine the way in which we think about methodology, and many have done that. So instead of talking, we can talk about methodology differently as a methodology in becoming 1,000 methodologies, methodological agility, and we can think about thinking beyond the notion of method itself. And then when it comes to curriculum, to ask particular questions, and perhaps asking some of the old curriculum questions, and then asking new curriculum questions. So some of the things that I have explored is to think about indigenous concepts and how one can bring that into conversation with more contemporary ways that people, contemporary thought, like postmodern, post-human thought, and to try and rethink those concepts, given that I would argue that a concept like Ubuntu, one can see as a philosophical concept, as a vital concept that can have particular transformative effects in the world. So some scholars have argued that Ubuntu, which means humanness, talks about relationality between human beings, and therefore one should view Ubuntu as being anthropocentric or speciesist. And I've argued that one should rather be seeing something like Ubuntu as a microcosm or emblematic of relationality of everything in the cosmos. And when one thinks about Ubuntu in that particular way, then you don't necessarily have to sacrifice some of the questions that are really social issues that are matters that society would like to address within social systems where humans are interacting with other humans. So issues of inequality in the world, of poverty, of gender-based violence. One can work within that and look at that as a broader microcosm of what one does in terms of looking at relationality with a more or other than human world. So when it comes to responsibility, it was very interesting because I think Astrid spoke about responsibility related to time, temporality. And then, of course, Joan Tonte talks about it more in relation to the issue of power, which I think is interesting, and makes the point that if one is responsible, for example, for someone else, so if a grade 1 teacher is responsible for children that is in her care, then that responsibility comes with a particular power that one assumes that that person has to care for those that are, in a sense, placed within the particular teacher's response within her care. So she has that responsibility, and it assumes a certain kind of power. So what Tonte says, that in a sense is not enough. So if we think about responsibility with the hyphen, able to respond, then one thinks about responsibility as ontological within relations with others, and then it requires loving attentiveness, curiosity, the idea of experimenting. And I think because I think there are, even though I accept the fact that humans don't enjoy ontological privilege, I think there is an ethico-distinctiveness within social relations that become important for humans to address particular concerns within social settings. I think there are social systems that exist amongst human beings that are as real as I think Levi Bryan says, the reality of accepting that cows farting releases anthropogenic gases that causes climate change. So I'm saying that, to me, I don't want to entirely sacrifice social justice, which relates to the distribution of burdens and risks in society that's not in social settings and in social systems that are not actually distributed evenly amongst human beings. But I think there's room to address that if one thinks about notions like Ubuntu, that talks about how we can positively relate to human beings as a microcosm of relatedness of everything in the cosmos. And then if we think about Felix Guattari's notions of his 3 ecologies, and we think about it more transversally, then we can think about social relations, we can think about relations with the more than human world, and we can also think about the psyche. And if there's destruction in the one, we see it transversely in the other ecological registers. And so healing, in a sense, can happen in the same way, that when we see healing in one ecological register, then it actually then we can witness it in the other ecological registers as well, through the concept of transversality. So maybe I think I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for kicking us off. We have about 40 minutes left for questions and comments. So I'm going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. And I think perhaps if you could indicate just by raising your hand, if you would like to ask a question, and then we'll come to you. And it would be nice if you could show yourself if you're willing to do so, so that the panelists can see you. So anyone like to kick us off? Any questions, either clarification or any other questions that you burning to ask the panelists, or even comments? And it doesn't have to be limited to what you've said here, it can pertain to the papers. Thanks, Astrid, for kicking us off. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I have I think it's a clarification question for Lesley. Lesley, I really appreciate your contribution, and I couldn't agree more on most of what you said. I'm not entirely sure where you started out and kind of ended too, with saying you don't want to sacrifice social justice for some ecological or multi-species justice. I don't see what would demand the sacrifice of social justice. In my world, they are conditioning each other. There would be no social justice without ecological justices, or I don't see the contradiction there. Maybe you can, could you explain why you would see in some accounts a danger of or the need to sacrifice social justice for another kind of justice? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, of course, there have been people that have argued for, in a sense, abandoning notions of social justice. But I want to actually bring Asilia in here because, and maybe I read her incorrectly, but I did almost, in a sense, read in the paper some dismissal of the concept of social justice. So sorry that I'm shifting it, but I was in a sense also responding to Asilia. But maybe I had the incorrect read, maybe I didn't read what she said correctly. So I don't know whether Asilia wants to come in there.
Sure. I think that, of course, I think that it's more, what I'm responding to is how social justice has been taken up, especially in recent years, in education and educational research. I don't have a dismissal of social justice. I think the way that it's been interpreted, and I think how it often is integrated into those same systems of hierarchy and domination. And I think that that's maybe more what I am skeptical about, right? And how, at least in the context that I'm in, it has been used as a way for the same people to determine what and who counts as social justice, and creating even these same sort of systems of evaluation, right? Like rubrics of social justice, or so I think that that part of it is what I have been have had a negative response to. I don't know if that answers your question, but I definitely, yeah.
So you said, you're talking about how it has been almost co-opted within neoliberal discourses. That's actually what's problematic. I know Elizabeth St. Pierre also at one point said that when she sees the word social justice, she stops reading. I was present in the
I was also there,
where she actually said that.
Yeah, I don't think that's, I think that also how it's been taken up has, again, privileged the most privileged groups of different power down groups. So I think that in a lot of the ways that it's been taken up, again, re-erases those same people that are sort of not ever centered in the conversation. And so I think that it has been very co-opted. It has been another way for privileged or people with different power to gain more power in a lot of the spaces, like even just sort of thinking institutionally, right? So if you can get research money, right, by sort of naming social justice, or all of the ways that it has, I think, come to mean something very different than what I was initially interested in. But I don't stop reading when I see the term social justice.
Can I abuse my position as a chair and follow up on that? Because I know you've written quite a lot about refusal, Asilia. And I'm wondering where social justice, does it lie outside of refusal? And is refusal also a refusal of social justice? And also, is refusal a responsibility? Is it a way of enacting responsibility?
Yeah, I think so. But I think you have to pay attention, right? Like, I think that's part of what I'm interested in. I'm thinking of Nathan Snaza's book. My headphones keep Animate Literacy.
Which one? Yeah.
And he talks about attunement, right? And he's citing someone else, I think, but he's talking about the ways we're attuned in certain ways socially. Like, we are sort of socialized around paying attention to certain things and ignoring other things, right? So when I teach classes about racism, I have students say, that can't be, I've never seen it, right? Like, I've never seen racism. I don't think that's, what are you talking about, right? And I'm very interested in this idea about being in the world and being so unaware, or being not able to recognize what is quite visible to other people. So I think that the refusal part comes from developing an orientation to paying attention in new ways, to paying attention to things that might not directly impact you. And so it has to be both, right? Like, if we're just refusing, we don't know what it is that we're refusing. And kind of going back to the earlier conversation about social justice, I see this where different groups who have experienced violence or oppression are interested in a kind of social justice that elevates their group, but don't have sort of a broader critique of that structure, right? This is sort of like a lot of the critique of what people would call white feminism, right? Where it becomes about, how can people like me get more, rather than sort of a challenge. So like, I think that refusal, when it's self-serving, is not really doing anything that interesting to me. But a sort of like practice of refusing those systems of hierarchy and dominance and violence in those small places where we can, from our positions of privilege, right? So being in a professor is a place of privilege, right? A cultural, social privilege. And so from that place, where can I refuse and push in ways that are not just about my own sort of elevation, but something else? I don't know if I'm getting at what you're saying, Vivienne.
Yeah. So it's a sensitivity and an attunement in a form of responding to particular circumstances, but with an enlarged view, not just a sort of looking straight ahead of you. Let's have a look if anyone else has got their hand up. We've got quite a few people in the room. I'm looking up and down. Oh, I see a few. I see Lesley, and then I see Teresa. Do you want to go ahead, Lesley?
Okay, so maybe my question is to Astrid and to all of us. So the way in which we produce our scholarly work, and when we actually share that work, and where it is that we actually write. So I wanted to know from Astrid, when you're doing the work and working with marine biologists, have you written and done a lot of your writing in spaces that are not sort of traditional spaces, like your office? So I'm thinking of Jasmine Alma's idea of writing on nature, writing through nature, in nature, and with nature, and what that does in terms of what is produced. And also to all of us to think about the way in which we actually do write and how we produce our work. So even our conversation using Zoom, and we're limited in terms of what we can do and what it is we can share. But acknowledging the fact that during the pandemic, the inventor of Zoom became a $1 billionaire, for example. So yeah, maybe Astrid and anybody else.
That's a really interesting question. I actually have to think about this. I'm doing a lot of thinking out loud and recording it and then writing it down, actually, because I think I'm more I think I'm more articulate orally than in writing, but yeah, I don't know if I haven't really thought about the spaces that matter. But one thing that relates is not quite addressing your question, but relates to your question. I think what maybe combines all our very different kinds of research and work is to try to find ways of working, not necessarily where, I'm not sure, but what ways of working that undermine existing practices and hierarchies, kind of related to what Asilia just said about the existing systems, rather than you can't really oppose them, and you don't, especially if you have been excluded from the systems of power, you don't want to be included, right? You want to undermine them. And how I think this is where creativity resides for me. Is in a way, it's different ways of and it's something I think the expert is Donna Haraway, and in undermining and appropriating something that belongs to some more powerful full narratives, and then appropriating it at, I'm thinking of a cyborg, appropriating it for liberatory purposes. So it is this kind of way of working that we are all looking. I'm trying to do it in this, I'm trying to read the science against itself, right, very often. So I'm trying to see where the science is already undermining so it's a reading practice in a way, right? So where the science is already undermining its self-perception, where it's doing something else that is not expected to be doing. So that is my approach. I'm not quite sure how it translates to space and of writing, but maybe Asilia wants to say more about this. But thanks for the question.
Viv, you muted. Are you talking? Oh. Viv? Oh, must I? Asilia, are you going to respond to?
Oh, I thought that someone else was asking a question.
Oh,
respond to the, I think the only thing I think I have a response to is Astrid's point about undermining. I feel like that is a very interesting way of putting it. And I think that feels really right to me. What I think I'm always trying to be up to is undermining particular ways of thinking about curriculum and instruction and teaching. And so I think that sort of also is tied up in this idea of a refusal, right? There is this sort of like, I talked to a group of students last week who are going to be teachers, and they're like, how do we do this? And I said, well, if you want to do this sort of like justice oriented kind of work, you can't do your job, right? Because your job is to not do that. And so I like this idea of undermining. So thank you for that, Astrid. I think other people have questions.
Sorry, Viv, I don't know whether you can see there are 4 hands.
Viv, I didn't really have much to add. I was going back to the social justice issue. Should I just very briefly that it brought up for me that rather maybe it's a bit of a tired old argument about the human rights agenda, particularly with regards to childhoods and the way that the kind of northern Western view of children's rights actually undermines other children's lives and livelihoods, like the ideas about all child labor is exploitation, or so it clarifies for me the thing of that it's about privileging certain humans over others, and I think that the issue of children makes it also quite clear. I don't know if that relates to what, I mean, with Lesley saying that he wasn't prepared to sacrifice the social justice for the broader ecological. And I think I think Asilia mentioned this fact that it's more about privileging certain humans, but it links to the ecological in a way if you look at those livelihoods as being more relational or more participatory, where the dominant concept of social justice is actually going against a lot of those values.
A shame, Viv, we actually can't hear you. Maybe you need to just, do you want to try that again?
Yeah, we can't hear Viv. But I know
Is it
Karen
working now?
Mullis had a hand up, and then Gail, as well as Rose Ann.
Is it working now?
Yes,
Is
we
it?
can hear you now, Viv.
Okay. So I was going to give the other people a chance also to ask their questions, and then give it back to the panelists to respond to any of the questions that they would like to. Roseanne, would you like to go ahead?
I think Gail was first, and actually Karen also has been waving her hand.
Okay.
So maybe we can do Karen, Gail, and then I'll go at the end. Thank you.
And there is also one in the chat.
Yeah, hi. No, my question is in the chat, and sorry, it goes a little bit away from what you're talking about, but I was quite interested in Lesley and in Astrid's mentioning of diffractive methodologies, or Lesley was talking about methodologies, perhaps challenging reflective or reflexive ones. So that might not be relevant in this forum, but that was my particular interest. Thanks.
Karen, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. It doesn't follow directly on from the discussion so far, but I was struck, Lesley, by what you were saying about, and I might remember wrongly the way you explicitly, said it, but it was about ontological exceptionalism. You're referring to the human and say, well, it hasn't got an ontological, was it exceptionalism? I can't. but you probably understand where I'm going with that, is that what I have found and
Ontological privilege, I think I said.
That's it. That's right. So the human being privileged ontologically. And it reminded me of quite a lot of I haven't really seen a good discussion about flat ontology and whether it is that people do feel. So I'm really interested in the panel's own views of whether they think their commitment to post-humanism or post-qualitative research is one where you commit yourself to a kind of flat ontology, and what does that mean? And I think in particular, following on from what Astrid was talking about, how important the human is in that writing process that you're talking about, and the thinking, and so the decentering of the human is not for me a flat ontology, but I would love to hear your views on that if we've got time. So
Roseanne, do you want to go ahead, and then people can
Thanks.
respond to all of them?
Thanks, Viv. We're all over the place, which is quite exciting today. So I want to say thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Astrid. I've heard you before. Thank you, Asilia, and to Lesley. My question is probably directed at Asilia, but certainly Lesley and Astrid, if you would like to contribute a comment. Asilia, if I could just first start by quoting your own paper to you, where you write, at every level, schooling teaches away from the trouble by locating it in the past, but we have come so far. So I really, really appreciate that. But then I just have something you said today was about the conditions of arrival, being attuned to conditions of arrival. But then, I mean, I'm wondering about what that means for the children or the student teachers in your class, or those art educators even. But maybe just thinking about child and childhood. So they've arrived in this space, in this place, and it's not located in place and time. But then how do we account, and how are we responsible for them resisting change and them accounting for change? It's a daily struggle that a teacher can get up. Well, for me, a teacher can get up and leave the classroom, but a child, a teenager, an art educator has to ask, or there has to be something that has to give in order for that to occur. So maybe just to ask you, and I mean, no disrespect, obviously, to say Elizabeth St. Pierre. I mean, I'm using that as an example where she says, I can stop and read. And we talk about how, again, Asilia, in your paper, how the privileging is hierarchized. We don't let children stop when they no longer want to read. So that's my provocation, and to ask you, and even with the fish, certainly in the work that you're writing about too, Lesley, I mean, I read your more methodological papers, but thank you. So that's my comment question. Thanks.
Okay, so I think each one of you can choose something to respond to.
I can respond quickly to, right, like, I think that's what you ended with, right? Children don't want to read, we don't let them stop, right? And I think that really is the problem, right? I think that we have created classrooms as spaces of, normalized abuse, right? I think where kids who need to go to the restroom can't, and like all of these. Many years ago, when I was an elementary school teacher, I had a student who would regularly use the restroom on the chair, right? And I had like only one way of understanding that. But I think about that a lot, many years later. And like, that was his way of being able to go home, right? Away from very boring content, a very restrictive space. I did my dissertation, I did observations in a high school for my dissertation. And I was only there half the day. It was horrifically boring, horrific. I was an adult in that space and I could barely stand to be there, right? So I think this idea, like, maybe that's what we have to sort of rethink. What are the things that we're asking kids to do, and why? And are they the things that we should be asking them to do? And I feel like for future teachers, they have not yet often not all of them. The ones who had trouble in school, who failed and who were suspended, have thought a lot about this already, right? And I actually think that those are the people who should be teachers, but haven't really critiqued their experience and are often signing up to be that same police officer of the classroom, right? To discipline and manage. And that's the thing that they get most excited about. They want to ask me about class, but how do you control the class, right? Is that right? Like, is that the question you should be asking? And how does that sort of desire for dominance and control is in direct tension with things like that we say we care about, like social justice or all of that. So I think that we can rethink that. Why can't kids say, I don't want to read anymore, right? Why can't they get up and go to the bathroom? Why can't kids have more, be more comfortable in this space? And how does that change all of our ideas about school? I don't know if I answered that. But the last thing I'll say is that a lot of this is quite race, gendered, and classed, because in the US, the school where the rich people go, the kids have a lot more agency and freedom and choice. And they can get up and go to the bathroom, and they go on field trips, and they have lattes, right? Like, so I think part of it too is like the ways that schools are institutions that reproduce economic status, right? That's like Jean Annion's work from the 80s that is still completely relevant. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Thank you.
So I can try to respond to Karen's question. So if we go to Spinoza and we accept that there's one ontological substance and everything else are modes of life, so the human, every other organism, the desk, the table, thought are all modes of life. That those modes are positioned on an immanent plane, so nothing transcends. No particular mode transcends any other mode within that kind of that particular Spinozan monism. What distinguishes one mode from another, and particularly in the case of organisms, is their conatus. It's what the organism has that enables that organism to survive, to gives it agency in relation with other modes of life. But there are particular effects that are produced in those interactions by particular modes of life that does allow ethico-distinctiveness. So I would say that humans do have ethico-distinctiveness. In other words, there are effects that are produced that enable us, that enables humans to be responsible, able to respond. I don't know if that, I don't know whether Astrid wants to respond to that particular question.
Yeah, I think that is a moment where we diverge a little bit in our take on post-humanism, I believe. I do think, I mean, I see Bariotti and Spinoza and Deleuze in your work, Lesley, and I'm coming from Derrida, and there is a distinction, even though I disagree profoundly with Bariotti on where that distinction is. But I don't think the deconstruction is not affirmative of differences, or rather the opposite. But I personally, I don't believe in flat ontologies, and I also I think Derrida would allow, and I think Barat too, allow a multiplicity of ontologies that are not relativistic. Right, not multiple in the sense of plural, but multiple in a well. Let me try again. Let me try. It is I think Spinoza and Deleuze hold on to the dichotomy of immanence and transcendence, and Derrida doesn't have to do that because deconstruction starts with what is readable, what is there, what is it is in a way it is it depends on inheriting something that is a task. So it is not it doesn't have to pose different as some affirmative transcendental thing. So I think that is a I think is a difference in approach, but yeah, it is related. Let me try to get to the question around to methodology and diffraction. I think it is a working diffractively or deconstructively is both not critiquing. It's both not saying that you were wrong and this is right. It is looking through something that is there in a way, and it's a work of translation in a way. Translation is maybe another word for working diffractively, reading with an inheritance of something. You can call it lens. I don't really like the metaphor of lens so much, but diffraction grating is also a lens. So well, one's framework works as a lens through which something else is read, and then something new is created through interferences. Is a way of generating something. I don't want to say productively, but generating something that makes a difference without having to critique something else. But that doesn't respond really to the question of flat ontologies that are related to power, of course. And I'm not sure. Since Foucault, we know that power is not just sovereign power, that power is also related to related to specific kind of practices. And well, this is getting me too far away. Maybe I need somebody to put me back to where the question actually was. Maybe Lesley, you want to help me out here?
Vivi, is it not possible for us to hear what Karen what her take is on this?
If she would like to elaborate.
No, it is one of those questions that keep posing itself to me again and again, because it is the project of decentering of the human, and especially methodologically never being able to escape from the fact that you're part of the phenomenon, right? So there is always that extra that grabs you in the neck. And I just loved, Asilia, listening to you today. I do anyway, but today the way it was constantly that awareness of how you can't escape yourself constantly in your practices. And so it's in a I've never really thought about it in that way. So that was for me a sort of new dimension of, again, having that sense of what is that the role of the human in methodologically, ontologically, but I have to think more about what you were saying, Astrid, in terms of multiple ontologies, and I know that Lens Taguchi is talking about that, and I am not sure how you can escape relativism. So, and so it was a shame that you stopped there. So, but let's keep thinking together about that, because I don't know what to do with that. Thinking about multiple ontologies that are not relativist.
I have just been made to teach a class on the ontological turn in anthropology, and I'm on Amerindian culture, and I'm not an expert on that at all. But what I did understand from the readings is that some Amazonians' conceptions of natures is really multiplicities of different kinds of natures, rather than, I mean, we are thinking in terms of multiple cultures and one nature, right? And that is relativism. But if you start to think of multiple natures of different multiple worlds and not just different perspectives, you don't have relativism. Those multiple worlds can coexist. Relativism is when there are multiple perspective emerging from one underlying ground. But if there is no privileged underlying ground, there is no more the different natures do for in that kind of cosmology, different kind of natures do exist along side by side. And Buddha Latour is also talking about multiple natures, right? But I wanted to respond to something else you said, Karen, about the decentering of the human. I think for me, decentering of the human or avoiding human exceptionalism does not mean that there's no power anymore, that everybody is equal, right? And one reason I'm engaging with microbes is exactly because you really, the idea of including more and more organisms or entities and the privileges that white heterosexual humans have, it has to stop somewhere, right? And it stops with the microbes. There is no way that we want the same ethical and moral systems to be in place when it comes to considering microbes. We do kill them every day, and there is nothing wrong with that, right? And we need to, this is where we have to rethink what ethic means, right? When you engage with and of course we don't want to say that, we don't want to translate that to human relationships, right? There is, so the analogy can't work anymore. So decentering humans does not mean equalizing anything, right? And that can't be the goal. I mean, in the time of slime essay, I'm trying to talk about biocentrism as opposed to anthropocentrism, that which I just see is just the other side of the same coin, right? That can't be the solution, or it is just yeah. I don't know if that helps. Or was it?
Yeah, just to explain, is that it's a response to quite a lot of post-humanist literature and childhood studies, where the decentering of the child is one where, by focusing, which I don't agree with, by focusing on the more than human, almost that a lot of that literature actually is not about children. And so, but focusing on the wind, etc. That is some of the critique, and it's a response to that. And I think what is still sort of the risk of erasure by decentering the human. And I think what we still haven't heard in most of the literature in post-humanism is that the decentering of the human is a decentering of the adult human, And Roseanne was sort of alluding to it when she was talking about it. And Asilia, I loved what you were saying about classrooms and the abuse, the everyday abuse. And I just don't understand how that is still, that we're in the same way, Asilia, when we talk about the human, that it is a human of particular race, and it is so much of a particular age as well. And so it is that complexity that we're working with, when methodologically we are very much in the center of the doing of these practices, and at the same time we're trying to do something else, and it's working with that complexity, but very much as adult humans. But sorry, I didn't want to comment at all. I was just interesting about what you wanted to thought, but it's really nice.
It generated a lot of interesting discussion, and I sort of feel that we've just begun, but the time is against us. It's 17:31. It's been a lovely conversation, and I think it could go on. So thank you so much to all the panelists for agreeing to come. It's been a long time. We organized this, I think, in June or something. So it's eventually come to fruition. And yeah, it's been a very generative conversation. And I want to also thank the people who asked questions, very interesting ones, which I don't think they're easy answers to at all. So thank you, everyone. And
can I just
don't
say,
know if, yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just say, first of all, thank you, Viv, because I think the space that was opened up in the way you did was so generative. So thank you for that. But also, if people, the way this actually follows on from the conversation that started when Mirka Koro was organizing the panel in June or May, I think it was. But also, it would be amazing if we could continue this conversation by having another panel, another symposium where we pick up these ideas and continue the conversation, because this network is also about getting to know each other in about our research through these kind of events. So if you just get in touch with us, if you would like you to be part of a panel, and maybe know someone you would like to involve and invite to that panel, so that's what we're going to discuss on the 14th of January. What are the kind of events we're going to still organize once a month next year? So I hope to see you during those events. Thank you again, Viv. Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you all here for being here.
Yeah.
And can I just applause for the amazing panelists today and their work. I'm a big fan of all your work. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for organizing and having us.
Yes, thanks very much. I hope I can join you a lot more next year.
Thank you
That's
again
a
for
promise. Okay, take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 I'm gonna stop the recording.
Yeah.